Hey folks, my name is Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery. What did I just do? That is so cool. Okay, today we're looking at the prototype of a brand new version of what is easily one of the coolest, most innovative, and just plain fun utility blade knives that have ever existed. And this is my top personal recommendation for anyone looking for a fidgety utility blade knife because look at this. It's just so incredibly cool. I love this thing. This is the Zero-G from Rivery Manufacturing, and it just dropped on Kickstarter. It's an updated version of the original Zero from Rivery Manufacturing, and this was already one of my absolute favorite knives. I got in on the original Kickstarter for this about a year and a half ago, and I've had it for over a year now, and I absolutely adore this thing. And what they've done is made a bunch of what look like small, but are actually pretty significant improvements across the entire thing that make this just overall a much better version. And on top of that, they've done something so freaking cool because look at this. This is a spring-loaded pocket clip that then disappears into the handle. This is patent pending. I am so excited about this. I adore stuff like this. And yes, we're absolutely going to talk through exactly how this works and the history of disappearing pocket clips in general. I cannot wait to go through this video because this is so freaking cool. Now, like I said, this is the Kickstarter that just went live right now. It runs through July 16th, and I'll have that link down below. If you're watching this from the way off into the future and the Kickstarter is already over, I'll also have a link down below for Rivery Manufacturing's main regular product page where you will be able to find this and where you will eventually find this when it's no longer part of the Kickstarter. Also, quick aside, please forgive the band-aid throughout this whole video. This is actually a leftover injury from Blade Show that just simply won't go away because antibiotic-resistant bacteria exist in the world. Yay! But this does kind of illustrate just how easy this is to use because I can so quickly and easily manipulate this even with my main primary finger incapacitated. Now, Rivery Manufacturing was founded by Michael Sayers. Now, technically his name is Kevin Michael Sayers, so shout out to a fellow Kevin, even though he doesn't go by that. And he's a mechanical engineer and product designer, and he'd been in the kind of like manufacturing and CNC space for, somewhere around 10, 15 years. About a decade ago is when he started Rivery CNC as a job shop. He had a couple different other Kickstarter projects for neat little fidgety things he could make. And about a year and a half ago, he created Rivery Manufacturing in order to make the Zero. Now at this point, he has 3 other employees. I got to meet, I think, at least 2 of them. Ryan and Quentin, I know, were both at Blade Show. I don't know if Alex was there, but there's only the 4 of them, and they work entirely out of Michael's basement in Sevierville, Tennessee. That's about 40 minutes outside of Knoxville. So 100% of what you're seeing here is machined and created in Tennessee. And all of the material and parts inside, the little springs and everything, are sourced from the United States. The one exception here is these magnets. You simply can't buy magnets like this sourced from the US, so that's the only thing that's coming from overseas. And if you're worried at all about tariffs, if you're about the Kickstarter, they did source in a large amount of these in preparation in case there was some kind of supply chain shortage. But generally speaking, this is all US manufacturing, US labor, US materials, and that's just really cool to see. Quick aside, Smoky Mountain Knife Works did an incredible shop tour with them. I'll link that down below. It's really cool. It's a great interview and you get to see their entire setup. Now that Rivery name is pronounced Rivery. That's how normal people would probably read this, and so that's how they pronounce it to everyone. But technically speaking, this name is a portmanteau of Michael's 2 daughters' names. There's Riley and Avery, and if you mix them together, you get Rivery, which is how he says it in his own head. But to the rest of the world and to like the general public, this is Rivery. The name Zero came from the fact that they were describing it as a deceptively simple knife. And the name Zero-G is, it's in part just kind of a continuation of the Zero name. They plan on making other products in the future that are part of this Zero line. But the name is also kind of a jab at some of the other fidgety things, stuff like this. That's gravity-based. So theirs is called Zero-G because it works even in zero gravity. The Zero-G maintains all of the same mind-bending, fidgety fun action of the original Zero, so let's focus in on that for a moment. The way you open this is by holding the base of the knife in your hand and then pushing upward on this slider. When you pull it back, the blade just kind of magically appears. I love that. I love that it feels like the reveal of a magic trick. To close it, you simply pull back on this slider and it disappears. Again, it feels kind of like magic. It's a really fun one to show friends. You get a lot of those like, what did I even just see reactions from people. If we look at this from the back, it's a little bit more clear what's going on. As we push this forward, it's pulling the blade up with it, and then it's retracting back around it. Still feels kind of mysterious though, doesn't it? We'll take a look at exactly how this is working inside once we open it up. But it's incredibly easy and fun to do. It feels so good, and every single time, it still feels like magic. I've had this original version for over a year now, and it never gets dull. Every single time I do it, it feels incredibly fun. And that feeling as the blade snaps back into place, you feel that thunk inside. And it feels so good. It's just authoritative and pleasant. It's incredibly satisfying. Now, if you're already familiar with the action of the original Zero, they've improved it in one really significant way. On the original Zero, when you're sliding this forward, you're pushing first against this little magnet here. There's one on the opposite side, and you have that part that's resisting your motion, and then also this spring. You can see it right there. That spring is what retracts the carriage while you're closing it. So to push this open, you have two different forces that you're resisting, and it takes a concerted amount of effort. It's very easy, but it requires intentionality. You're never going to open it accidentally. Now, to close it, unfortunately, you're only pushing it back against that one spring. So the amount of force it takes to close this is just a lot less. While it's still really fun to do this, it's not quite as satisfying and clicky. And importantly, it means that it's sometimes a little bit too easy to accidentally retract this when you're using it. I've had that happen to me a couple of times. That's my one and only real complaint with the original. And they've fixed that over here, basically by doubling up the number of magnets around the bottom. And so now you have more force to open, but it's still quite easy to do, but twice as much force to close. It's significantly harder to pull this back unintentionally, and it's much more satisfying click when you pull it back. The fact that it also echoes inside that makes it sound clickier too. It's just all around so much more satisfying. This general mechanism is really, really strange in the best kind of way. It's a manual OTF, automatic in the front. It's a single action auto, but in the opposite direction you normally find. Very, very few people in history have ever done something like this. The first that I'm aware of, and perhaps the most famous, is this right here. This is the Boger-matic. This was released in 1988 from Boger Knives, and is a design and patent from Denis Lemaire. You shift this part of the handle over, which aligns that cavity in the middle and allows you to push the blade forward. You then shift this back behind it, and it holds it open. To close it, you simply shift this again and the entire thing slides back. It has always been one of my favorite oddball knives that Boger put out, and it's just so fun to show to people. And so it's incredibly cool to see that same kind of bizarre, inverted, fascinating movement in a small, compact form factor. And this is so much more fidgety and fun than that thing ever was. It's also just a lot more intuitive. In general, this feels like a perfection of that idea. Yeah, it's incredibly fun, but this knife isn't a novelty. It's actually a really practical EDC tool. This knife is definitely on the larger size as far as utility blade knives go in my collection. I tend to have things that are incredibly slim and light like this, but there's plenty of times where this larger size is actually a lot more preferable, especially if you're ever trying to put a lot of force into a cut, or if you just have bigger hands. The size just feels really, really nice in hand, especially in those situations where you're putting a lot more pressure down. Okay, let's talk about left-handed use for a moment. Now, obviously this design is primarily aimed at right-handed users. That motion for operating it is incredibly comfortable and familiar already. Now, unfortunately, they're a very small company, and Michael has said that while they want and intend to make a dedicated left-handed model at some point, it's not something they're going to be able to get to anytime soon. So at least for this initial Kickstarter drop, for sure, there's not going to be a dedicated left-hand version. So let's talk for a moment about what left-handed operation would look like. Obviously, if you want to emulate that same motion, you can move it over and just using your left hand like this. That does make the blade open the wrong direction, so you would have to turn it over. It's not hard to do that, but no one really loves to do that. So I would say the best way to do this left-handed is to simply operate it like this. What you're going to end up doing is putting your fingers along this spot, and instead of pushing up with your thumb, you're going to be pulling down with your thumb. You simply do the opposite to close it. You push up with your thumb. And so this is actually really quite easy to do. And so while this isn't intended specifically for left-hand use, it's not actually hard to use as a lefty. Where things get a little bit annoying is with the clip. You obviously can operate this clip with your left hand, but if you put this in your left hand pocket and pull it out, you're going to be pulling it out in this kind of orientation, which is upside down again. So there's definitely some amount of maneuvering you'd have to get in order to get this into this kind of orientation if you did want to do this style of left-handed actuation. So while this certainly isn't a proper lefty knife, it's pretty darn ambidextrous and actually still quite fun to use left-handed too. So let's talk about the size for a moment. The size compared to the original is tremendously similar in almost every dimension. The big thing here is going to be this length. On the original version, we've got 2.67 inches long, and on the new Zero-G, we've got 3.69 inches. So at its longest point here, we're almost exactly an inch longer. This width dimension is exactly the same between them. We're looking at 1.18 inches, and the thickness here is again the same thing. We're looking at just a hair under a half an inch. Now, what's really surprising to me is even though it's an entire inch longer, it barely weighs anymore. The original version here weighs just under 2 ounces without a blade in it. Different blades are going to weigh different things, and so it's the weight without the blade that makes it best for comparison purposes. So this is just under 2 ounces, 1.979. This one over here is only 2.344. So how'd they pull that off? We're able to see it better when we open this up, but there is intense skeletonization inside this version now. So it's incredibly cool that they were able to give us this more hand-filling size and give us the room for things like this pocket clip with barely adding in any additional weight. And coming in at 2.3 ounces like this, it feels surprisingly light. It's a little bit nuggety, but you'd expect it to weigh even more. And a large part of that is because this is made in 6061 aluminum, just like the original. That's aircraft grade aluminum, so it's a great choice to have. And just like the original, it's also Type 3 hard coated. Yes, even if you have the silvery kind like this, it's Type 3 hard coated, which means that this finish is actually pretty resilient. Yeah, of course, if you skid this across the pavement, you'll scratch this up, but for the most part, on a normal wear and tear, even if you get one of these colored versions, it'll stay looking nice and clean for a pretty long time. It also gives you a really nice smooth surface for sliding. It feels so good. But it means that we also have something that's just a little bit more hand-filling, especially for people with bigger hands. And at 2.3 ounces, this whole package is very, very carryable. And we now have a pocket clip on this new version, which is something, like I said, I can't wait to talk about. While we're talking about the outside, this milling pattern here is an expanded version of what you see on the original. The lines are just kind of spaced out a little bit, and it just feels so nice. It gives excellent grip. They did a wonderful job of making everything feel nice and smooth, yet still giving you good traction. You got great grip on this thing. And if you are someone that is a fidgeter in terms of liking to slide your fingers along stuff, it feels really nice to just kind of play with this. This is, of course, just one milling pattern. Already on the Kickstarter, they have an alternative version with a kind of big divot here. It feels really good to place your thumb in that. They'll likely introduce additional milling patterns as they go. But this original version just looks great. It feels great. I really like it. Now, the next biggest change you'll notice compared to the original is that they've shrunken the slider part inward and nested it into the handles. This has a really nice benefit of giving you the strength of the handle this entire way to put your grip on. I talked about earlier how the additional magnet under here makes it harder to pull this back accidentally. But this wrap around handle part, especially since it comes all the way down to this chamfer, is another part of how they've improved that. Your hand is just supported all around. And so it's even less likely that you'll accidentally be pulling back on this in a way that's going to put the force on the slider. So that's a really nice improvement that I would like to see them backport to the original. Some people might think that the original design is cleaner since you don't see these lines around it. But personally, I think this is definitely better. The next biggest change you'll notice is that this version here is canted downward. It's straight across on the original version. And what that means is that you have just slightly more blade access. It's a full 1/8 of an inch more. This canting down here also means it's easier to access that full blade length if you're trying to cut against a surface. If you're trying to cut into a deep material where you actually do need to stick this all the way in, you don't have to twist your wrist as much in order to do that. So this is another really nice, subtle little change here. The last big change you'll see on the outside, again, aside from the clip, we're going to save that for later, is this lanyard hole. By expanding this outward to give room for the clip, we now have the area for them to do a much more standard lanyard hole. On the original, they provided a lanyard hole as an optional feature by coming in at an angle across the side. I opted for one without it because I'm not a lanyard person and I just kind of like the clean aesthetic of not having it there. But I did like the fact that on the original version, the lanyard hole was hidden and only visible from the side. So while this is a lot more intuitive, I kind of wish that they had done a version with that slot through. Maybe that's something that they will offer in the future. The one nice thing about doing a lanyard hole this way is it means that the lanyard cord can wrap up around this dimension. On the original version, it has no choice but to stick out this top part, and so you can feel kind of a little lump right there. And on this new version, it's able to stick straight out the back and not be in your way. But I'm not a lanyard person at all, so I kind of wish that they would also offer a version without any lanyard hole like they did on the original, just for people like me that simply don't want it. Maybe they will. Okay, let's talk about blade changes, and luckily it's incredibly easy to do. In fact, this is one of the really big improvements that they made compared to the previous version of this knife, and something that I really hope they backport to the original. When you're talking about blade changes on utility blade knives, there's three main things you have to consider. The first is, does it require tools or not? The second is it easy to accomplish? And the third is it intuitive? Would you be able to figure it out if you didn't already know how to do it? Now, on those first two things, this thing is knocking it out of the park. It's incredibly easy to do, and it requires zero tools whatsoever. But the intuitive part, this is the kind of knife where no matter how you're looking inside here, even when you're looking at an angle, you can't really see what's happening. And so you're not probably going to figure out how to do the blade change without someone showing you. But once you do know how to do it, it's incredibly easy to accomplish. All you do is extend the blade, pinch the blade, pull back, and now this lid is unlocked and it will simply slide forward and off. You pull it straight out and there's your blade. Now on this version, this carriage inside here is locked into place. And so it is so easy to just pull this off and swap it out for a new one. On the original version of the Zero, you open this up the exact same way, hold this here, slide this back, and now this can slide off. The problem is that this carriage is not retained. It's very easy to hold in place by simply putting your thumb here and then you can pull this off. But if you forget to do that, you'll end up lifting this whole carriage up out. And that can make the tiny little parts in here that make this work spraying everywhere. So while it's easy to hold it in place, it's easy also to forget to hold it in place. And on this new version, that's simply not possible. The way they pull that off is by adding this new channel along the inside here. And there's a little tab in the back that's riding in underneath that and keeping it captive. So on this new version, it's exceptionally simple to just pull this off, throw the new blade in, and slide this back in place. And you're done. One more time, you simply pinch that, let that go, slide this forward, pull off the old one, put on the new one, slide this back on, and you're done. It's that easy. And since we now know how to take this lid off, we can finally start looking at what's going on inside here. This is really, really neat. I'm gonna pop this off and then we can take a look at this carriage. This is effectively the way that a lot of OTFs work, or at least similar in design. What we have here is a tiny little sear mechanism and a spring behind it that pops it into place. Let's show what this looks like in the retracted position. This is where we're starting off. And when we slide this forward, at some point, we're going to open up into this little cavity right here. You can see that that starts to pop down and then the spring is able to pop that into place and it's locked. When you're closing the knife and you're sliding this back, this wedge right here slides along that channel and pushes that sear back over, allowing it to retract. I'm going to simulate that here with this toothpick, and you can see this happen. It's going to slide down this slot, pop that over, and now the entire thing can slide back. Click, slide, back. It's actually really simple. That's why they called this a deceptively simple knife, but it looks really cool. There's this other little part right here. You can see this little post sticking up. That's what holds the lid on and prevents it from sliding off. Now what's happening when you do a blade change is holding the blade in place and then sliding this lid back. That forces this little ramp right here to slide along this and push it down in. Now that that's pushed in, you can slide right past it to remove the lid entirely. When this retracts, you can see that there's a ramp right here that pushes that post back up. So once this goes down, you can see sliding right up. It's all so clever. While we have these open, we can talk about some of the small changes that happen from generation to generation. The first you'll notice right here is this incredible amount of skeletonization in the lid. That's the main reason why they're able to get away with having barely any additional weight. You also notice that there's just some general shape differences between these two carriages. The original version on the left has this notch up here, and that's simply because they had to have space for this magnet. On the new version, they have plenty more real estate, and so they don't have to do any kind of weird finagling to get around it. They can just fit it there. But they've also made some changes in where the magnets sit up front. You can see that this back magnet has been slid slightly further forward down. What that means is on the new version, it completely sits underneath the blade. And so it's providing even more retention against it. On the original version, it's slightly offset. I'm not entirely sure why they did it that way, but the new version does seem to be better. Another subtle difference is that these little lobes right here, these are the retention lobes that go into the notches on a standard utility blade. They've been made slightly shorter on the new version. And what that means is that you can now fit these Fiskars blades. These are a very popular blade. They're made in the US, but their little lobe shapes here are uncommonly small. And so these didn't fit in the original version, but now they do. I've tested these with a lot of different blades, and it works with basically all major manufacturers. Now, blades will vary slightly in their length dimension. The height is pretty uniform across them all, but there's no real spec, so they all will vary slightly. So you might run into a blade that simply doesn't fit, like the distance between here and this back corner might block, but the vast majority of common popular blades available, both in the US and the cheap ones you can get from China on Amazon, will fit in this knife, especially with this new carrier shape. Now, as far as regular blade change goes, this is the amount of disassembly you'll ever have to do. You just pop this off, you put the new one in. You never have to worry about taking this whole inside part out. And because it is now trapped in place and isn't going to spring out at you easily, you basically never do have to take that out. You really would only ever need to fully disassemble this if you're doing a really significant deep clean. You know, something really out of the ordinary, like you're eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich over and a big glob of jelly gets in there and it gets all caked in or something like that. So we're about to take this apart entirely, in part just to be able to show you what's actually going on everywhere, and in part to be able to show you how you would reassemble this if you didn't do a complete disassembly. But I want to preface by saying it's kind of complicated and it's not something you normally need to do. So only do it if you really have to. To get there, let's get the mat out. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is take your blade off. And you can see that we've got four main components here. We've got our carriage, we've got our sear, we've got our sear spring, and we've got our main spring. On the new Zero-G version, you can see there's this little raised part right here. If we pop this sear back in, you can see that as this starts to slide back, there's the little retention tab. That's the thing that's holding it in place. If we keep letting it slide back, it'll slide past that window. To fully remove this, we need to align it with that, and we need to lift up on the front of this. Now, as soon as I do that, that little sear spring is going to want to pop that outward, and so I'm going to do that with my hand kind of over it to blockade that so it doesn't go springing everywhere. Okay, that popped out right there. There's our little sear spring, and this is still hooked on, so it's gonna kind of catch at me. There we go. There's all of our components. So that was pretty easy to do, and if you do need to get inside there, you can clear out this track, clean out the inside, and these are your little pieces. Reassembling this, like I said, is a little bit tricky. It's not actually that hard, but these are our tiny little pieces. The first thing we want to do is take this sear spring. Look how incredibly tiny this is, and we want to put it back into that hole. Now, it can fall back out if you turn it upside down, but in general, I find that it tends to stay in place, but from this point forward, it's best to kind of orient this in such a way so this is facing upward. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can put this back on. I'm going to show you what I think is the easiest approach, and then I'll show you a slightly harder one in case you can't get this one to work. I think this is easier, but you might disagree. We'll see. The key here is to capture this little pin right here with your finger once you've put the spring on top of it. So you're putting this spring down on this little post on the bottom like that and pinching it in place. Now, at the same time, you want to lower this down in and place the other side of that spring on this back notch like that and pinch that in place. Now you've got the spring in both spots, and all you want to do is take your other fingers to rotate this around, stretch this just enough that you can get this in here, and just kind of lower it down in. I made that look really easy. I personally think it is pretty easy, but you might have difficulty. So I'm going to show you another way to do this. Okay, again, the first step is to put our tiny little sear spring inside. Now in this version, I'm going to take this spring and capture it on there with my thumb, pull this out, slide my thumb up and capture it and let go. I'm pinching this in place and holding that there. I'm now going to take something like a toothpick and slide this down in from above and capture that. So I can let go of my thumb now. And if I keep this kind of like that, it's no longer able to spring out. This might be easier for some folks because now they can hold this in a slightly more free way and manipulate this down into this space. All you have to do at this point is use the end of the toothpick to hook that onto that post at the back. Some people will find this part even harder than the original version, which is why I think the original way I showed you is a little bit easier, but this might work for some people. Just going to position that right there and kind of hook that on. And there we go. The last step is to put the sear back in itself. You can see that the spring is slightly popped out. So I have my toothpick here so I can easily push that back in. If you don't have something like a toothpick, it's pretty easy to just use the point of the blade itself for that. Now at this point, what you want to do is slide this whole thing forward with your hand and hold it in place. You're basically trying to align it with this spot at the bottom here where you have more room. Now you're going to take the sear. This piece is for the most part symmetric in all directions. So if you flip this around or flip it around, it should still work. If for some reason it doesn't and you have some alignment problem and it doesn't quite click into the place anymore, take this back apart, flip it back over and try again. I'm going to take this curved surface on the end here and use that as a little ramp to push it in front of that spring. I'm then going to drop this down. You can see that I'm pinching the front part with my thumb as I go. And at this point, it helps if you have your blade where you can kind of push the bottom corner over and align it vertically. You can see that it just drops down in now. This little sear pin here is magnetic, so one of the few hiccups you might find is that it might attract that magnet right there. Like I said a moment ago, it helps if you kind of pin things in place with your thumb. Now I made that look easy. It might take you a bunch of different tries. And again, like I said, this is kind of finicky, and this is the kind of thing that you only need to do if you're really, truly deep cleaning this. Under normal circumstances, this isn't necessary. Now I'm gonna show you something that's about to happen that has happened to me almost every time I've changed this piece out. When you slide this in, it might stop right here. And that's because this piece has been pushed up and it's blocking that. If that's happening to you, if you try to slide it in and you get stuck, just push that little post down in and you can slide right past it. So there you go. Okay, let's finally talk about this clip, and I am so excited. This is so incredibly clever, and yes, it is indeed patent pending. We're first going to talk about just how you use it, and then we'll talk about how it works and how it compares to other versions of people trying to do disappearing clips in the past, because this is an incredibly ambitious and uncommon thing for someone to try to do. So this clip sits completely flush under normal conditions, which means when you're just using this as a knife, you don't feel it in the slightest. I love that so much. When you want to actually use it, you simply push down on the back right here and it's spring-loaded pops up. You can see there's a tiny little catch nub right there. And so you can actually use this in this regular position with it fully in and just that kind of pinching right there. If I slide this down into my pants, it actually is retaining. And so if you plan on doing a bunch of different cuts, but you need to put it back in your pocket between all of them for some reason, you might want to just leave it in this retracted position and just let this kind of retention hold it in your pocket while you're going. When you're then ready to keep it in your pocket long term, that's when you slide this in all the way, push down on the front of this and pop up the back. Let's show that from a different angle. You slide it in and push on this front part and the back just snaps right up. And that means that when you're fully extended, you've got significantly deep carry. Now the retention on this piece here is strong enough that you can then use this in this extended version too. And in fact, if you have it out already, because it's from your pocket, you don't have to push this in to use the knife. The knife is fully operational without it, and everything is so nicely rounded here, and it doesn't stick out all that far, that in actual use, it's pretty easy to use this with this still sticking out and not even notice it in your hand. So in practice, the way I've actually been using this is just having this out while it's clipped in my pocket, pulling it out, using it, cutting it with that still out, and then putting it back in my pocket. It's really only if you're going to be doing extended amounts of cutting and you don't want any chance of feeling this that you really need to pop it back in. But it's also just really cool that it pops in and it adds another kind of fidgety aspect. The click that it does there is so satisfying. Now let's talk about how this is actually working. Michael is actually kind enough to send me home with the little parts that work inside this so I can show you how this is operating. Do you like my little mise en place bowl? The main part of this carriage is this piece right here. And you can see in this orientation, that's what's going on inside there. There's this little hole right here where our pivot goes through, and then there's these two channels in the back where our springs sit in. Where the magic happens is in this hole. This spring right here sits down inside this hole. And then there's two quite large 3mm ball bearings that sit on either side of those springs. In here, there are two detent positions, and those springs are pushing those balls outward into those two spots. One holds it outward, so that's what allows you to still use this spring, and one holds it inward and prevents this from just falling out. Now, on this prototype version that he gave me, this piece here is press fit into here. It can technically come out, but it's really hard to do and it's not meant to. But he knows that people might want to take this out for maintenance purposes or might want to take this out to swap out a different color clip. And so what he's working on right now is adjusting this internal mechanism to make it so that it is actually disassemblable by the end user. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but he said that he's pretty confident that that will be how it works by the time that this finally ships. But the core mechanics here is all going to be the same. I just love looking at the tiny little pieces like this. It's so clever. I also just really love that this is a spring-based clip. It's reminiscent of the Hawk clip from G&G Hawk, but significantly deeper carry. Now, this idea of making a pocket clip that disappears into the handle is extremely uncommon. Very few people have ever done this throughout history. In fact, this is one of the mechanism design things that I have spent a really long time trying to research and find all the examples of. One of my favorite examples of a disappearing clip actually isn't on knives, it's on the Lamy Swift pen. This first came out in 1990 and they submitted the patent for this in 1989 in Germany. When you push this in, the clip disappears. Push it back out and the clip pops back out. I love stuff like this. In the knife space, very few people have ever attempted this. One of the first was in 2006. This is actually a prototype of this initial hidden pocket clip mechanism by a guy named Daniel Valois. I was able to buy this from his estate. He's passed away, unfortunately. You can see that the initial part of this clip works fairly similarly to the way the Rivery one does. It's implemented different inside, but it just kind of flexes out. And that means you definitely don't get a very deep carry, and it's also just not that easy to use. While this is a cool idea, it's implemented way better over here. One of the next people to ever attempt disappearing clips is Joe Caswell. Now, the very first version he did of a disappearing clip was on his EDC knife, also in 2006, and it had a spine-mounted clip that came around the back like this. It looked very similar like this, but pointing the other direction. That one would manually retract into the handle. The same general mechanism is available on some Rockstead knives right now, and they do license the patent from him. 5 years later, he created this knife right here, which is the EDX. This one has the clip pointing the other direction, and it disappears automatically into the handle as you open the knife. This is such a weird, clever knife. Joe Caswell is a brilliant man. Flash forward another 6 years and you have his Provoke knife from CRKT. The mechanism here is so wild and cool, but what we're talking about in this conversation is how does the clip work? This is actually kind of similar to that original Daniel Valois version. You simply push down on this spring and that lifts up the top. The big difference is that the spring is connected down here, which means once that you've gotten this over the lip of your pants can then slide underneath this the entire way, and this is actually a tremendously deep carry clip. I don't have a version anymore, but Lion Steel introduced their own disappearing clip that they called Hide What Annoys You, the H-Whale system, in 2020. And it's kind of like this, except you push the clip out from the other side. So it does sink into the handle in a similar way, but you have to push it out and then slide it into your pocket. I've been able to track down a very, very small number of other implementations of disappearing clips, but grand total throughout all time, I've only been able to find, less than 10. So this is the kind of incredibly rare innovation that I am so excited to see. And this particular implementation that is usable in both the closed and extended position and only pops out when you need it to is honestly probably the best version I've seen so far. This design is brilliant. And while I love that it's on this knife, I honestly kind of hope that he just licensed this to a bunch of different knife manufacturers. I would love to see this clip design in a lot of other places. It's that good. Now, before we get into my final thoughts, I want to talk about one other really cool thing. I don't have an example of it right here because it's still in the prototyping stage, but on their Kickstarter, they said that if they crossed over the $100,000 pledge goal, that they would reveal a new surprise feature. They easily passed that already, so Michael gave me a sneak peek of what it looks like. Basically, they found a way to fit a spare utility blade inside this. Instead of having this skeletonization inside, they hide another utility blade in there. They have a plate sitting on the top that covers it up, and there's magnets holding that plate in. It's a really clever idea. However, it does add additional weight because instead of having this skeletonization here, you've got steel blade. So it's the kind of trade-off that a lot of people would want, having a spare blade handy, but not everyone. And so I like that it's an optional feature. And it's just another great example of the incredible kind of clever design they're doing here at Rivery Manufacturing. Okay, so what are my final thoughts? Honestly, I absolutely adore this thing. I already really loved the original Zero, and it keeps everything I loved about it and makes those things better. They fixed the one and only thing that I didn't like about the original, and not only did it fix what I thought it was going to be fixing, but that same fix made it even more fidgety and satisfying. I adore this new version. I very sincerely hope that they backport all of these evolutionary improvements to the original version, because I do hope they still continue making this. I fully assume they will, and I see a lot of value in having a more compact form for someone that just simply doesn't ever want a pocket clip. But a lot of people are going to want a pocket clip. And so it's so incredibly cool that they came up with a really innovative, novel way of doing that. The big problem with pocket clips, especially side-mounted pocket clips, is that you usually feel them in your hand. But this version that completely hides away and is still usable in that hidden state is so incredibly clever and effective. There's not very many people doing clever stuff like this. And so when you find someone that is, it's so exciting. The size, shape, form factor of this knife, it's incredibly easy to hold, use, manipulate. I just love it. It's not going to be for absolutely everyone. Some people, like myself even, really want a slim minimalist thing most of the time. But some people are going to want this bigger, thicker dimension no matter what. And even myself, if I'm going to be doing something that requires more force, this is the kind of form factor that I want for that. And like I said, I was already recommending this to anyone that said that they wanted either a thicker knife or something with a really fun fidgety style of manipulation. And this is simply a better version of that with an incredibly cool new feature. If you're even remotely interested in this, you really need to go check this out. Kickstarter is up for roughly another month. It ends in mid-July, and their delivery expectation is around February. But they said a couple times to me at Blade Show that they're working pretty hard and putting a lot of steps in place to make it so that they have a high chance of beating that goal. And at the Kickstarter price, this is only $85. I'm not sure what it will go for at final MSRP. These versions are currently sitting on their website at $70. This might sit up around or even above 100. I don't know. But right now at $85 for something that is so incredibly unique, so incredibly functional, and something that is made entirely in the US in someone's basement, this is an exceptionally good deal. So huge thank you to Michael for sending me home with one of these prototypes. I absolutely love it. I hope you all love it. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you all next time.